My name is Jason Maxwell. When I was 12 years old, something terrible happened in my life to someone I love. And it wasn't until 3 years later that I was given any kind of resolution to it. Even now, I'm not convinced I have closure. There's too many questions. When I was 12 years old, I used to enjoy cycling around my neighbourhood. And myself and a number of the friends that grew up in the same place, we all liked to head out to this quarry at the back of a place called Rutherglen, just outside of the south side of Glasgow. The quarry was filled up with water, and we were told by our parents, don't go near there. Told by teachers, other people had drowned there before. We didn't pay any attention to all of the signs that said danger of drowning, danger of rock slide. None of that. We just went, I think, because it was dangerous. We used to take our bikes there, and we used to cycle around the quarry quite a lot. There was one guy who's like a kind of security guard or caretaker. His name was Dean Short, and we used to make fun of him because he was also quite short, so we found the name funny. And I suppose we were a bit cruel. We would shout things at him as he tried to chase us off from playing around the quarry. But he never caught us. We were too fast on our bikes. So we would have to be careful about when we went to the quarry, and first sign of Dean we would leave as quickly as we could because we knew it was only a matter of time before he phoned the police on us. But there were times when we got to the quarry and we were able to play for a while before Dean came around and ruined our fun. We used to play this game where we would take our bikes and try to skid as close to the edge of the quarry as possible. There was like a 60 or 70 feet drop, at least that's what I remember. And we knew it was dangerous, but there was a thrill in it, and we were kind of egging each other on like a game of chicken. There was one person in our group of friends, her name was Wendy, and Wendy, she had a bit of a hard time because, well, we gave her a bit of a hard time. She was the only girl in the group. And there were a lot of remarks, comments about how only boys could do certain things and all that sort of stuff. And I think because the way we were with Wendy, as much as she was our friend, she felt like she needed to prove herself. Somehow show that she could do everything we could do. There was one afternoon, I remember it was one of those glorious days of sunshine that you always remember during the school holidays. And there was what we called the Devil's Slide. It was an incline at the top of one part of the quarry, and it led down to the edge of this really high drop into the water. And it was the scariest thing you could do in the quarry, but we would say to each other about riding down the incline, down the Devil's Slide, and then you have to pull a skid just as you're getting to the edge of the quarry. The closer you could get, the braver you were. Well, poor Wendy, we told her there was no way she could do it. And so she went up to the top of the Devil's Slide, and we encouraged her to do that. I wish I could go back and speak to myself and all those young boys and tell us not to. But I can't. I think because Wendy was trying to outdo us because of the way we had treated her, she pedalled too fast down the hill, faster than any of us, and when she tried to go into the skid, it was too late. She just went over the side. And there was no yell, no cry, but I remember the thud on the surface of the water as she hit it. And then there was this silence. And a silence like that is worse than any scream. So we couldn't get down to her. We ran, we tried to find help. We tried to find Dean, the security guard. We tried to get home. This was before we were all carrying, mobile phones or anything like that. Finally, we managed to get some of the parents, and we got the police, and we went back there, and the water was just this still blackness. There was nothing there. Wendy's body she'd sank. They sent in divers, but they couldn't find her. They dredged the place, but they couldn't find her. And they said that they thought her body had been pulled down by some sort of underwater current, and that she had got tangled up in all the reeds down there, and the weeds and all the junk and rubble. I had nightmares about that, thinking about her down there with her eyes open, just staring up into the darkness, cold, alone. We felt the guilt is, I can't put it into words. Wendy's family were heartbroken, of course. Probably were never the same again after that. I know I wouldn't have been. But I was a kid, and my parents looked out for me, and they said I had to try and not blame myself, and I had to try and move past it, and I did. I got on with my childhood, even though Wendy could never do that with hers. And then 3 years later, I was 15, and it was late evening, and myself and a few of my friends, we were drinking in a park. One of my friend's brothers would go and get us some cider from the local off licence, and he would take a cut of the money we gave him, but he would get it for us, and we would sit there and drink. Way too much definitely for that age. Anyway, I remember this was really another group of kids. They didn't really know Wendy well from back in the day, and there was one kid in particular. He didn't know me very well. He'd come from another group, and he started telling ghost stories and urban legends about the area, because the park we were in, it was getting dark and it was spooky, and we enjoyed that sort of thing. Anyway, he then started telling the story of the girl who drowned in the quarry, and he told the story exactly as it happened, as if he had been there himself, but he must have heard it. It must have been spread around the area like a game of Chinese whispers. Except he added a part on, and that part that he added on was that sometimes people would see the girl who drowned walking around the rim of the quarry, pacing where she had fallen to her death, as if looking for her body. And I got angry when I heard this. I told him I was there. He didn't really seem to care. I think maybe he didn't believe me. But we ended up getting into a fight, rolling around on the ground, punching each other, and I had to be dragged off of him. And then I just left. I grabbed a bottle of cider and just went walking around the area. And I don't know why exactly, or maybe I do, but I ended up at the quarry. I ended up standing there in the night on the edge, looking down at the water. It was so dark. It was so still. I thought it was going to swallow me up. But I just hoped that I would see her again. And as I looked down into that water far below, I felt 2 hands on my back thrust forward, and I was falling. Someone had pushed me, falling and falling, and I remember hitting the water, and I remember all the wind going out of my chest and not being able to breathe and trying to flail, and then just darkness. I woke up. I don't know how long I'd been unconscious for, but I woke up in the darkness. At first I was completely disorientated. I didn't know where I was and what had happened. And then I realised I was in some sort of room. A room I could barely see because of the dim light. There was really not much light anyway. There was some cast underneath from like a door, I think, somewhere. But I could see an outline of the room. And there she was, Wendy, sitting across from me, just as she'd been. And I rushed over to her, and I tried to hold her and tell her how sorry I was. But her body was like leather, and it was hard. And then I saw that her eyes and her mouth had been sewn shut, and that all the moisture was gone from her body. She was mummified. And then, just as the horror of that came, suddenly a hand grabbed me from behind and pulled me over to this old refrigerator unit, this long thing that I remember it being opened and the bright light coming from it. And inside there was salt, piles and piles upon salt. And whoever was holding me threw me in there and held me down. I remember the smell of the salt. I remember the feel of it on my skin. And then I looked up and I realised who it was. It was Dean Short, the security guard. The one we'd made fun of all those years previous. And he was holding a small shovel in his hand, and he was scooping up some of the salt, and he started pushing it down onto my face. I remember coughing the taste of it. And then I saw a needle in his other hand. And as soon as I saw that, the desire to live kicked in. And I remember grabbing his hand and thrusting it up, and the needle went up through into his neck, and he gasped and he fell back. But I don't remember there being blood. I managed to pull myself out of the old freezer unit and looked around. I went to the door with the light coming from underneath it, and I pulled and pulled and pulled at it, but it was locked. There was no way out. And then I saw Dean scrambling to his feet, and just as he did, I heard a loud snap, and then the rustle of a sheet, and I looked and I saw on one of the walls there was like this old dingy sheet that I don't know what I thought it was. I thought it was just like covering like an old painting or something like that, but it fell to the ground, and there it was, another door. And I ran for it, and I pulled at the handle, and it opened. Before I knew it, I was out into some strange house being chased by Dean, and he was relentless, but I was faster. I wanted to live. Until finally I tried every door I could, and then I was out into the cold night air, running and running and running, and I didn't stop. Not until I got home. My mum and dad phoned the police when I got there. And what I was told was that they arrived on the scene and the police went in and they found that Dean had taken an overdose and he was lying inside the freezer full of salt. He must have known that the game was up, that he was caught. He was a coward, wouldn't face jail. And then after that, there was the terrible news that Wendy's body was indeed in that room. As far as the police could figure it out, Dean had gathered up Wendy when she'd fallen, probably while we were all running off trying to find help. And then he'd taken her back to his house. Dean had apparently started preserving things from a young age. He started with small animals, that sort of thing. And then there was Wendy. It was too good an opportunity to miss. One of the kids who'd made fun of him. I think sometimes, was Wendy alive when he found her? Did he sew up her eyes and her mouth? Well, there's one other thing that has always stuck in my mind, and it was something that I heard one of the police officers tell my father, which was that there was a discrepancy in the crime scene that they couldn't quite account for. And it involved Wendy's mummified body. Apparently in her hand they found the edge of the sheet that had been pulled down from the door. The sheet that had obscured the escape. It was in her hand. I think about that and I do wonder